This is Covenant Eyes TV, helping you to stay safe and pure online. What do we do when we find out that our teenage daughter has been looking at pornography on the internet? How can we help her? To help us answer that question today, we've got Heather Lundy. Heather is the manager of a counseling center in the Denver area, and she has a lot of experience talking to girls and their families about this pressing issue. Now, Heather, have you ever counseled teen girls when it comes to this issue of pornography?
I have. Yep, I have. I've been counseling girls dealing with those types of issues for about 2 years now, when I started to see the need specifically for that population.
So explain for people here, how is that teen girls are getting wrapped up in pornography to begin with?
You know, I wish I could give you a cut and dry answer for that. To be honest with you, what I think more about is, where is there not an entry point?
Right. Good point.
It seems like in culture today, and in a very image driven culture, that there's entry points all over the place. The difference is, what is drawing that teen specifically to enter into that entry point, and for that to become a behavior that draws them in to consistently looking at porn, for that to become a struggle for them. And that answer to that question really stems from what is going on. You know, porn, a lot of times for these teens, is but a symptom of a deeper issue. And so what I spend a lot of my time with is, what is that deeper issue? What is going on underneath that is drawing you and feeling like you have a need to hang out in those arenas?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Help us to get inside the mind of a teen girl for a minute. What's going on? Maybe it's someone you've counseled, or the types of girls that you've counseled in your office. What's going on inside their mind? Why are they drawn to pornography on the internet to begin with?
Well, I'm going to answer that question in two different ways. First, I think we have to take a look at culture. The ways that teen girls are drawn to porn is different. There may be similar themes, but it's different than when I work with women in their 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s. Generationally, these teens have grown up with technology. They've grown up with words being deconstructed. What I mean by that is, 5 years ago, I could post a paragraph length update about how I'm doing and I would get a ton of likes. Now, if there's not a picture included, if there's not hashtags, if it's not less than one sentence, people breeze by it. It's a very image driven place for these teens. And so they're inundated with images constantly. You can't negate the ways that porn is included into that, or porn-like images. In addition to that, they're connected to technology in a very different way than even I was. They begin and end relationships through Twitter. They begin and end relationships through Snapchat and Instagram and all these other avenues. And so the way that porn gets into that conversation is, porn is an image among other things, and they can have a familiarity with that image that is different than adults. And so there's a lot more avenues to be invited into that world. And again, it's more about what they choose to do with that, being in a very image-driven place. Now, the mind of a specific teen, some general themes that I see with a lot of teens is worth issues, struggles with understanding intimacy, and I think that can be both from a family system standpoint, or they were never taught how to have relationships face to face. And so they have a hard time understanding how to cultivate that, and it drives them to things like porn. And other issues that I often see coming through my door is image, whether it's body image or self-image issues. And also, a lot of times they have very core wounds where they fear relationship in a sexual sense. They either don't know what to do with their sexual drives, they don't know how to express them, they just know they're there, or they don't understand it and it confuses them, and they just come upon something like porn and find that as an outlet for themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about that issue of sexual desire first. As they're experimenting with their other sexual desires, and they're running into pornography on the internet, or they're experimenting with it, or they're trying to learn more about it.
Sure.
Are you noticing other issues connected to that as well, whether it be chatting sexually online or sexting or something like that? Are you noticing those kind of things as well?
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen enough correlations to be able to draw a link directly saying if they're looking at porn as an outlet that they're also sexting, or that they're also sexually active even, or that they're talking with guys on chat rooms. I will say, however, that entering into looking at porn and into that realm opens them up more than perhaps some other teens that aren't using porn. So with each, that's a very case by case situation. Now, as I start to understand again some of the root issues of what's going on with the teen, that can help me know more about why they're choosing the avenues they are. Because even if two different teens are both looking at porn and sexting, the reasons why they're doing that or what's going on that's driving them towards those behaviors can be completely different. Um, so not necessarily, but it can open them up to different avenues. Sure.
Right. Well, let's talk about the switch gears here and talk about the body image issue. What about looking at pornography is sort of the medication that the girl is taking in order to soothe this body image issue that is going on with her? I mean, what about watching these, sex athletes on screen is helping, or does she think is going to help with a body image issue?
Right. Um, you know, I wish one of our counselors worked specifically with body image issues. That is not my specialty. The thing that I've seen with teens who I'm working with more dealing with the sexual aspects of their struggles, whenever body image gets woven within that issue, a lot of it is creating a relationship with that image where they're desirable, where the focus isn't on their imperfections. The focus is on, oh, this image clearly desires me. I see with teen girls, there is both this impersonalness with images because they're inundated constantly, but there's this also personalness because of that. And so when they're looking at these images, it takes them out of their insecurities, out of this very realistic world where they don't have to face that. And they can look at this image and for a moment, and usually it's a very brief moment because shame comes very quickly after the fact for a lot of them. Not all of them, but for a lot of them. They're taken out of that. They're taken out of their insecurities and looking at something that is desirable to them and thus makes them feel desirable.
So if you're sitting across from some parents, let's say you've got a teen girl in your office with you, and her parents are with her, and the teen girl, she's been really just kind of dove headlong into this thing for months or even years. We're hearing stories of years of girls who are getting stuck in this stuff. And you're having an audience with their parents. What are some of the things that they can start doing? I mean, beyond the practical, there's always sort of ways to guard and protect and those sort of things to keep their daughter away from pornography. But to get at those root issues, what are the things that parents can immediately start doing right now to help their daughter?
Well, in some ways, I think in your question, you kind of gave the answer. I think one of the biggest ways, and I love having these conversations with parents, one of the biggest ways parents can enter into this issue with their teens is seeing their daughter beyond the issue. The issue needs to be attended to. But a lot of times when things like the subject of porn comes up, or another uncomfortable subject for parents comes up where they don't really know what to do with it, and it kind of freaks them out a little bit, and they have so many questions about their daughter and about their parenting, et cetera, et cetera. The thing that I encourage them to do first is see their teen before addressing the issue. The issue needs to be addressed. But if you miss the person beyond the issue, you're going to miss it all completely. And so if you can first address the person sitting in front of you, understand their heart, understand what's going on, and maybe if they don't want to chat with you, connect them to the resources that they need, whether it's a mentor who can feel comfortable entering into this avenue, or a counselor that can walk alongside them that's trained to deal with these kind of issues. That is core, because it's showing the teen, even through the parent, not freaking out, not shaming them immediately. It's showing the teen that the parent cares most about them and about working with them on what's going on. Because the behaviors that often draw them to porn are very isolating, very shaming, very confusing. And when they're first met with that, when the parents are trying to dive into things, when they're first met with shame, or their parents' own confusion coming out on them, or whatever it may be, that almost reinforces why they turn to porn rather than turning to people to work through whatever is going on.
Well, actually, no, that's an interesting point, though, because this element of shame, I think, is really critical. I mean, we talk to guys all the time who struggle with the shame of looking at pornography, knowing they're looking at pornography, wondering what other people think about them looking at pornography. But generally, though, I think it's culturally accepted, and even in the church culturally accepted or expected anyway, that men are going to be interested in porn.
Sure.
But it's not necessarily the case with women. In a growing capacity, it is. There's more women who are becoming interested in pornography, or at least is becoming more socially acceptable or socially understandable. So from a cultural perspective, we're seeing that. But in the church as well, we're starting to see that growing awareness as well. Do you think that this element of shame plays a more acute role in a woman's life because she's wondering, this is a guy problem and I'm a woman. Why am I, a woman, drawn to this kind of stuff?
I kind of see a spectrum of responses. I see some of the responses that you're talking about of, I'm a woman. Why am I dealing with this? This is confusing to me. My parents knew what to do with, not me personally, but I've had clients say to my parents knew what to do with my brothers. When they found out about me in my 20s, they didn't know what to say. I also see some women saying, with a great deal of shame and a great deal of frustration, why don't people get that we deal with it too? We are sexual beings too. And something that I feel like is happening, which is one of the reasons that I have such a passion in dealing with these issues, is for a number of reasons, it's harder to ignore the fact that women are dealing with this. And there's a number of different avenues that that's coming out. And what I think, and this is my own opinion, that I'm starting to see is, in certain ways, we kind of have a very narrow view, socially, relationally, emotionally, of masculinity. It kind of hangs out in the small gamut. But sexually, for men, we kind of have a big gamut view. We have these expectations about how men are going to act out sexually. For women, I feel like it's the opposite. We have a pretty wide spectrum about how women can act relationally, socially. That's why I think sometimes we have more patience with girls who are tomboys when they're younger. They'll grow out of it. They're just athletic. But if a guy's very effeminate when he's young, there's maybe some more struggles that he has. The femininity is a little bit more expansive, but sexually for women, it's kind of viewed in a more narrow sense.
No, that's very interesting. Can you unpack that a little bit more? I really want to hear what more you have to say about that.
Oftentimes I see that the church is usually about a decade and a half behind culture with some of these things. That, now, don't quote me on that. I don't have research in front of me to say that. But I would let's hang out in the church specifically, because I think that's what I can speak to most. Because to be honest with you, that's usually what comes through my door. With women dealing with these issues in particular, that within the church, women relationally, socially, emotionally have a very wide expanse so they can express that. Typically, men feel that it's narrow for them. They're even down to what their hobbies can be. Your hobbies can be hunting, fishing, shooting, whatever. And some churches are attending very well to kind of expanding what interest can men have that's very acceptable. But for women, that can be a little bit more expansive. Even relationally, it's okay for women to hold hands with their friends, to give them hugs or kisses on the cheek or whatever. They can express themselves emotionally in a pretty wide, expansive ways. Well, if you see a guy going up to their friend and just kissing them on their cheek and holding their hand, people are probably going to turn their head. There's going to be questions. Now, for better or for worse, that's not what I'm talking about. But what I'm saying is, sexually, there has been more of a receptiveness, even though the church has also seen the huge issue of porn for men and wanted to attend to that. For women, there is this sense that we express our sexuality in very narrow ways, or that we don't deal with our sexuality and don't struggle with our sexuality in similar ways as men. Now, I think there's nuances between male and female sexuality. But I think what we're starting to see and what people's eyes are starting to be open to is, women struggle. Women struggle in their in a wide expanse of ways, more than we ever thought, and more women than we ever thought struggle in these ways. And I think what parents are starting to see is that's permeating to the teens, and it's harder to ignore. Does that kind of help unpack that a little bit more?
Oh, no, it does. It does, absolutely. In fact, when I see the stats on this come in, it's interesting when you see some of the statistics that are coming out. You've got a survey done of over 30,000 college students here not too long ago, asking them their experiences with pornography, and there's of course dozens of other surveys of college students asking them of their experiences of pornography. And what we're seeing coming out of these studies is that about 3 in 5 women are seeing porn before the age of 18. And that some of those studies are even 3 or 4
Sure.
years old, so the numbers could be higher even now. But 1 in 5 women are spending time online every week for sexual purposes. And this is what they're
Yes.
saying in the surveys. And that's just the ones that are every week. And so when you think about that, and we're not talking about just the ones that are occasional, we're saying that every week, if you were to take a survey of your own congregation, or if you were to ask people to raise hands or stand up, if 1 in 5 teen girls were standing at the question, I spend time online every week for sexual
Right.
purposes, that could, in many churches, be a startling number of women. So the issue is enormous. And of course, the church and the parents have something to respond to this,
Sure.
so I want to kind of talk to you about those in order. First, let's talk about the church, then we'll talk about the parents. If you're a church leader and you're trying to address this issue with your congregation and you want to begin the steps to bring this issue into the light and bring out a greater dialogue to help people begin talking about this more, to help people begin normalizing, not excusing, but normalizing and trying to help people to understand that this is a much bigger issue, it's a much broader issue, and this is something that needs to be discussed. What can church leaders do?
Sure. Well, I think the first step is awareness. That's something that I am working on diligently is the fact that this is happening. And oftentimes, what I'm seeing is that there is a discomfort because it's not what we're used to. Okay, we're not used to having to attend to women dealing with porn. We're used to it with men, but not with women. Um, and I think, in addition to that, just like you said, I think one of the big points is opening the dialogue um, and creating avenues where these women can have a safe and appropriate setting to dialogue about these very things. Whether that's if your church doesn't have the resources, to give them resources and have resources readily available for support groups or connections to Covenant Eyes, or having a few women on staff or in volunteer positions who are willing to help women dealing with these things, but to have tangible outlets for women to not only have their voice heard, but to have options for how they can work on these things. I think those are the biggest parts of that. Now, if you look, on the gamut of churches, most churches are led by men. Now, this isn't a conversation about whether or not that's good or not. My point is, we can naturally, being male or female, can miss what's going on for the other gender. And so I think as a church staff, especially if you're a primarily male-led church staff, having ways that you can specifically attend to the issues that are going on with the women and making a conscious and active effort to do so is a huge leap. Because best of my intentions, I will miss things because I'm not a guy. And if I am in a capacity where I'm influencing both genders, I'm going to need help to understand what are the guys needing that I would never see. And so I think that's very much what's happening with the women, is figure out ways that we can attend to what's going on. And sadly, if I'm honest, some of what we're seeing, even in the stats that you read with porn, is we're kind of catching the issue after the wave crashed.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
We're catching the issue when it is rampant.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you about next, though. We're talking about stuff that's going on. The wave is crashing into your office, and this is on the back end of the problem, and you're seeing all the fallout from all this stuff. But what can churches start doing when that wave is a mile from shore?
Hmm.
This is a wave that these are girls that are right now, they're online, they're experimenting, they're dabbling. Maybe they're not online. Maybe they're just flirting with their new sexual
Sure.
desires and feelings and emotions. And right now, there's no real acute problem that they're thinking. That they're not ones that are likely to ask for help or to ask for guidance on anything because they don't necessarily see a problem yet. What can churches do to help girls early on as they're learning and as they're growing in their sort of their in their sexual development?
Some of it, I think, is shifting our perspective on how we do church. That's the very big level question, or big level answer to your question. What I mean by that is the church often participates in reparative work, issues that are already going on. Sin is a perfect example of we will constantly have reparative work to do as a church. And I think that is consistently true. I think one way that we can attend to these issues a mile off is focus more on doing preventative work.
Right, exactly.
So, listening to the congregation, I think, is a huge aspect to that. Listen. Don't listen once the house is burning down and once all the lights are off and nothing's working. Listen when one light doesn't work in one room. And that's a metaphor that I mean by listen when the door is cracked and they're letting you in a little bit, saying, I'm kind of struggling sexually. I don't really know what's going on, rather than I've been looking at porn for the last decade and I've lived in this shame and I don't know what to do with it. And I think some of that is a willingness to enter into uncomfortable subjects that we may not even have the answers to yet, but we're willing to look at the landscape and say, a mile off, I kind of see this coming, and how are we going to attend to that as a church now so that we can maybe prevent the wave from crashing a decade later?
Wow, that has some major ramifications and implications for the church. I mean, not just for the large gatherings where there's one or two people or a few people speaking from the front of a large room, but also on the ground level, at the grassroots level, with all the relationships that are within the church. That's where the bulk of the listening and the discipleship happens. So, do you see churches that are catching on to this?
Sure, I do. I absolutely, and I'm very encouraged by that, and that's part of what gives me my heart for being on a church staff. And my hopefulness for that. I typically see churches respond one of three ways. I typically see a church either say, we have so much reparative work, we can't even think preventative. Our bandwidth is tapped and there's just no possible way. All we can do is handle what's in front of us. And if that means that we're a decade late and the wave has crashed, sorry, we're doing our best. And I think those churches have the best of intentions. Other churches I see are so wanting to attend to issues that are a mile off or to issues that feel untouchable or uncomfortable that instead of actually attending to them, they kind of enter this um, avenue of wanting it to just be all thrown out on the table and very raw. And it's actually to their detriment, because what they're doing is they're not equipping leaders to know how to attend to these issues. They're not creating an environment that is safe for these issues to be talked about. They're just creating an environment for people to kind of word vomit and to say that this is what's going on and there's no follow up.
So in all of this, would you say that the key to it all is the training of good leaders so that when we begin having conversations about sexuality or teen sexuality,
Right,
what is maleness, what is femaleness, what is this temptation I'm
right.
encountering on the internet, what are these sexual desires that I'm feeling right now? Would you say it's the training of leaders that is kind of the key to making sure that all these conversations that are going on in the church or that are about to come in the church, to make sure that those conversations are fruitful?
Yes. I think that goes back to the preparation, that the key to this conversation is equipping people within your church to be able to step in when these issues come up. Because the thing that can happen is you can have an environment, since we're talking about teens in a youth group, where you'll have 100 teams come forward and say, I'm struggling with porn, boys and girls. What's the follow up?
Yeah, exactly.
Great that we're creating a safe place for people to share, for people to even share what's a mile off. But if we have no follow up, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. And that the follow up is what is key to being able to attend to what is going on and also create an environment that the wave doesn't have to crash so big next time. And so I think it's having more people like the conversation we're having who are willing to think very critically and in depth about what do we do with this? How do we attend to this? And the thing that I consistently tell people is whatever issue comes your way, first look at the person standing before you. Don't let the issue cloud you from seeing that person. And that's usually a great place to start. Because when they're more concerned about the issue or their theology about the issue or what's going on, they'll miss the person. And that's oftentimes where I see churches miss the point, and they, again, camp out in a place where waves continue to crash big and they can't participate in preventative work.
Great. Well, let's switch to parents now. Parents are obviously the first line of defense and offense in a lot of these situations here. In the
Sure.
home, the parents are primary guides for their children and primary guides for their teens when it comes to this stuff. So let's say parents have come into your office. They know that their daughter is kind of been diving headfirst into pornography on the internet. She's really, really wrapped up in this. What are some good first steps that parents can take to deal with the issue?
Sure. I think the very, very first step is to meet the teen where they are, whatever that means. You know, that could be a number of different answers to that. And it's too many for me to even describe. Meet your teen where they are. The second response, I think, to that would be pay attention to what's going on in you. One of the things I most see when working with teens is the parents miss themselves in the process. There may be things that are getting brought up in you when you find out that your teen is using porn that has nothing to do with your teen using porn. It has everything to do with your own history, your own story, your own insecurities as a parent. Whatever that is, listen to that. Because that is telling you something about how you need to deal with what's going on within you that will then translate into how you deal with your teen. I think a fantastic third step is to say, based on where your teen is at, based on where you're at, what are support systems that we can put in place to help with this? Because if we're talking specifically about teens, you have less than a decade before they're off to college and before they're adults. And so teen years are a perfect time to help prepare the teen with resources that they will then know they can turn to when stuff hits the fan when they're adults. So whether that's a resource like Covenant Eyes, or that's a resource like a counselor, or having several mentors in their life, or something like that that shows the teen, hey, when stuff goes wrong in the future, when you're an adult and your parents don't find out about it when you're on your own, you know you can turn to these things. And so I think it's a perfect parenting opportunity to cultivate within the team support systems that they can emulate for their future, as well as for the present. And then I think within that, the fourth step that I would say, if we're talking about first steps, is to look as a family in appropriate ways. I'm not saying that when you find out your teen is using porn, that they need to tell all the other siblings and everybody around them. But look as a family is, how do we want to grow together? Rarely does porn use happen in a vacuum. Now, I'm not casting blame on anybody, but rarely does it happen in a vacuum. And how can we as a family cultivate an environment that not only helps the teen deal with their issues, but as a family we can grow together? Because what I often see when parents are struggling so much when they're finding how deep their teen is into porn use, a lot of times that's triggering things within them that they see they wanting to work on as a parent or as a family. Listen to that. See where that takes you. And be careful that you don't allow the teen to become the scapegoat in that situation, that all the blame just gets cast on them, because that just encourages the shame.
This is really good. I mean, what you're saying is really important here because, prevention is, of course, a part of the picture when it comes to pornography.
Sure.
There's prevention
Sure.
methods, and, of course, there's protection methods that are all part of this. But it's not just about prevention or just about protection. I mean, parents often can so easily go to the default mode of what worked when their daughter was 7 or when their daughter was 9 in giving her tools or trying to prevent problems. But, really this can be a very short-sighted solution because parents, they're not just trying to raise this daughter to be in their home forever. They're trying to raise her for adulthood, for life. And so it's not just about prevention. It's not just about protection. It's about preparation. It's about how do we help prepare them for adulthood. And so if you're relying on bigger fences, higher walls, in order to keep the big bad world out.
Right.
What are we doing to prepare them to go outside of those walls where there are no walls, there are no
Right.
fences, there are no filters? And so this is really key. So you're talking here about the family growing together as a family through all of this, right?
Yeah, and I would say two things within that. One of them being, I would absolutely love, I would love so much to have conversations with parents when they find out that their teens are using porn and say that this is the exception. I would love that. But it's not these days. That's not what I'm finding. Now, I'm in a unique position as a counselor where when people have issues, they come to me. So I recognize that nuanced position. But oftentimes I see parents get tripped up by saying, how do they even know what this stuff is? How do they even gain access to this? How do they even conceptualize wanting to go here? And again, that connects to meet the teen where they are, meet the teen and what's going on. And maybe growing as a family is talking as parents about, we're kind of in denial about what our teens are exposed to and what are we going to do with that. And so again, it's a very family specific way to attend to those issues. There's not a blanket fix all for everybody, but I think that that's part, if you're willing to look at what is our specific story, that will help mend things for the long term. And if more families can do that, that creates a collective growth. It's when we give easy answers that we continue to see loopholes and people falling through the cracks and things not getting attended to, really.
So what you're saying is I shouldn't call this video 5 Easy Steps to Cure Your Daughter of Porn Addiction.
It'll probably be a great draw for people to come in and chat, and then they'll be sorely disappointed.
Right, exactly.
Right. The second part, I think, that really needs to be affirmed is a willingness for parents in an age-appropriate manner to talk about healthy sexuality with their teens. And if we're talking about the church specifically, being able to formulate what they feel is a healthy understanding of sexuality theologically. I cannot tell you how many teens, and it even surprised me if I'm honest, but how many teens come through my door and just say, I wish my mom told me. I wish my dad was willing to sit down with me. I was so freaked out when this first started happening. I didn't even understand the biological responses. I don't know what is good or what is wrong, so it all feels like shame. Or people who dealt with it and then the parents found out about it and they said, just stop using it. And then at age 30, they're coming into my office and saying, I've shut down my sexuality for the last decade. And I don't know what to do with that. So being able to articulate what is healthy sexuality, how do we express that? How do we live in it? Because it's part of who we are. And if we're going back to that male and female conversation, I think there's been more willingness to say, okay, guys are sexual. But with women, what do we do with that?
Right, exactly.
And be able to talk about women are sexual too. It's just as much part of us, even if it looks different, as it is with the man. How do we live that out in a healthy way? Does that make sense?
Yeah, right. And absolutely. And obviously, as parents, we need to be helping to frame for our teens what sexuality is from God's point of view. And that's really important. And I really think when you get to the teen years, when it comes to topics, there's not a whole lot of topics that are really off limits at that point. I mean, parents have got to be the first ones and the primary ones to talk to their children about all kinds of issues when it comes to sexuality. And, and parents just have to ask themselves, do they want the internet or do they want, their peers at school to be the primary educators of their children, or do they want to be the ones who do that? So do you have any parting words for parents who are dealing with this at home, where their teen daughter is struggling with lust, is struggling with pornography, is struggling with sexual desire, trying to understand it? What parting words of encouragement can you give them?
You were talking about earlier the fact that there's very little that teens probably don't know, especially these days. One of the first questions, this may sound a little bit left from the left field, but one of the first questions that I can often ask when I'm working with somebody, when it's appropriate to ask this question, I often ask, how do you enjoy your sexuality? How do you enjoy it? How do you enjoy being a sexual being? Because oftentimes we can camp out so much on the issues of how that goes wrong or the ways we struggle with it that we just say, well, it's bad, or it's bad until marriage. That's the classic I hear in the church. It's bad until marriage. Well, as a single person, you're a sexual being, and sexualness extends upon sex itself or pornography, looking at sexual images. It's my voice is higher because I'm a woman. That's because hormones were released that are very female. Your physical being, your how you interact with the world, that our sexuality is interwoven within all of that. And so the things that I encourage parents to do is not just camp out on the negatives, the ways it can go wrong, but camp out on the positives. Because I think one way to address this issue, not just dealing with the ways it manifests negatively today, but also to create a trajectory of people living out their sexuality in healthier and healthier manners in the future, is seeing what we can enjoy about it, seeing what we can embrace about it, seeing the positive sides to it, and saying that's good. Your womanness is good, and how your sexualness is connected to that. How can we live that out in healthy ways? Because I think one of the things that reinforces the struggles is we camp out so much on the issues that we forget the beauty of the fact that we are sexual beings, and that is incorporated into who we are just as much as our physical, emotional, mental, etc. And so how can we have a balance of parents addressing clearly and directly and in depth the issues with it, but also say, let's talk about what does it look like to live out your sexuality and your sexualness in a healthy manner.
This is really interesting, because when you're using the word sexuality or sex, you're not just using it in sort of a narrow way, talking about just intercourse. You're not just talking about sexual intercourse or sexual experimentation. You're talking about sexuality broadly, maleness, femaleness. You're talking about how a person understands sexuality as a part of who they are as a person, about their personhood. So help us. Just give us a real tangible example of that. How does a single teenage girl enjoy her sexuality, enjoy her femininity, enjoy her femaleness as she's blossoming into a woman? How does a girl really come to enjoy that? Give me just a real practical or tangible example of that.
Sure. Well, I think at the most basic level, teens are going through a lot of physical development because their hormones are kicking off for their maturation, which includes maturation sexually. So I think that is a perfect time where more than ever we're seeing our bodies change literally into being more woman, more man, getting to the pace of maturation where we can have kids, et cetera, et cetera. That is a perfect time more than any time to say your development is good, and in the most appropriate sense saying that. Because girls come to me and they're like, I'm freaked out by this. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what to do with these desires. What the heck? No one told me this. There's no manual. What do I do with this? I've never felt this in my stomach before when I see a really hot guy. Being able at the most basic level, seeing they're starting to experience their sexuality in maybe more of a physical sense. And that is a great opportunity to say, okay, let's talk about that. How do we live that out well? Rather than being scared by it or feeling like you have to shut it down. And that connects also to a family developing their theology around healthy sexuality. Based on what we think scripture says or what we think healthy sexuality is, how do we live that out and enjoy where we can live that out in healthy ways? Rather than just saying, I don't know, and that's weird, and let's just not talk about it. And then see, the thing is, teens don't just shut that down. If parents aren't willing to go there, teens don't just shut down the conversation. They form their own conclusions. And sadly, oftentimes those conclusions aren't the best. For women, especially women in the church, what I consistently see happen is they just shut down their sexuality. Meaning, I can't biologically respond when I'm attracted to a male. I can't have any sexual desires. And then suddenly they're married and everybody's like, have fun. And I'm not just talking have fun and have sex, though that's often the conclusion people draw, but have fun and enjoy your sexuality, because now that you're married, suddenly you can see that you're a sexual being. And these girls come to me and say, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know I can't even enjoy my husband because I don't know what to do with my sexuality in myself. And yeah, what I'm talking about in sexuality is just not the act of having sex. It's recognizing your personhood, that being a sexual being is just as much interwoven into the fabric of who we are as our physical, our emotional, our mental, etc. And being able to embrace that part of us, single, married, whatever. Now, how we live that out looks different, but being able to enjoy that. If I saw women could enjoy the fact that their sexualness is connected to who they are just as much as anything else, I guarantee you I'd have far less women coming to my office when they're married freaking out over not knowing what to do with it.